Amazing. Joining us on the line is Brad Polumbo, senior contributor to Young Voices, contributing columnist for the Washington Examiner, and opinion editor for FEE.org. That is the Foundation for Economic Education. He's previously a staff writer and editor at the Washington Examiner. Brad, thanks so much for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about this supposed infrastructure bill. We've learned from Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York that literally all the things are infrastructure. There's nothing that is not infrastructure. Joe Biden also says cancer research is infrastructure. He says Alzheimer's research is infrastructure. He says that his latest can of Ensure is infrastructure. So what exactly is it that Americans need to know about this fake infrastructure bill?
Well, if I take anything away from the last week, it's that everything I like is infrastructure and everything I don't like is Jim Crow. But in the case of this infrastructure bill, it's not an infrastructure bill at all. So it's a lie from the very premise. It's a false premise. The majority of this spending in this $2+ trillion package does not go to the kind of things that any rational person considers infrastructure: bridges, roads, highways. Instead, it's got $20 billion for racial and environmental justice. It's got money for public schools and community colleges, a special program to make school lunches greener, and all sorts of absurd waste and unrelated partisan spending. So people support the idea of infrastructure, and the Biden administration seems to think they can just cram their wish list together, slap an infrastructure label on that bad boy, and get it all passed.
So the Senate parliamentarian recently ruled that the Democrats may have another bite at the apple, not just two budget bites at the apple, but a third bite at the apple when it comes to taxing and spending bills. So what is the current status? Can Biden just ram this thing through again with just 50 votes plus Kamala Harris?
Yeah, he probably can, is what it looks like. And that's pretty alarming because this is an unprecedented spending blowout, like nothing we've seen before. And they're actually even undercounting it. So they're saying that this is a $2 trillion bill or a $2.25 trillion bill. That's actually also a lie. It's very misleading. They scored this legislation over 8 years. But we always do it over a decade. We always look at the bills over a decade. So it's actually more like 2.65 or 2.75 trillion. That sounds like just number fudging, right? But it's actually $3,500 per federal taxpayer extra in spending that they're trying to cover up. So I don't think people know just how radical this spending blowout really is.
And it is pretty amazing how the media have just gone right along with the everything here is infrastructure stuff. They've also gone along with the lie that the administration keeps putting out that this thing is going to create tens of millions of jobs. There's no evidence whatsoever that it's going to create tens of millions of jobs any more than Barack Obama's green jobs plan created any green jobs. Well, on what are they basing this peculiar claim?
So they're claiming, this was Pete Buttigieg, this was the top White House economist, that it would create 19 million jobs. And that's just a total distortion of a report from Moody's that found that if the infrastructure plan is passed, the entire economy will create 19 million jobs. It's very different from saying this plan will. And then that's compared to a baseline where 16.3 million are created. So it's actually 2.7 million jobs are created by this legislation. Now, why do you think they lied? Because that real number comes out to $833,000 spent per job created. That is not a good deal for taxpayers, and it's not even looking at the other side. You know, progressives seem to think that you can just look at the benefits of government spending and never talk about the costs. But every dollar that's spent on infrastructure has to come from somewhere else in the economy, higher taxes or less money for business investment. So I'm not convinced, Ben, that this would actually create any jobs on net at all.
Well, this is the bigger issue here, is that as we just continue to overheat the economy, I mean, this is the recipe for creating a bubble. We have a natural economic expansion that is going to occur in the wake of what was the greatest artificial depression probably in the history of the United States. It wasn't some exogenous economic shock to the system that created this. It was COVID. Basically, everybody just went home for a year, and now everybody is leaving their home and they're going back to work. We had an incredible economy before COVID hit. And so on the back of that, on the back of this natural growth curve that we were already going to experience, Joe Biden is just piling on top of that a bunch of government spending, just helicoptering cash out there, basically. And then the predictable effect of this is going to be price inflation. It's going to be people's savings being devalued. And eventually what's going to happen is that demand is going to drop because demand can't keep up with the supply of dollars being pumped into the economy.
Yeah, certainly that's all true. And it's just unfortunate because they're going to cram through all this big government spending and their kind of progressive wish list. And then they're going to say, look, it worked. The economy is going back to normal. It was always going to do that when you start to unwind these destructive lockdowns that have had these horrible consequences. So what they're essentially doing is taking advantage of the crisis, never let a crisis go to waste, cramming through all the big government programs they can think of and all the trillions in spending. And then when the crisis takes its natural course and as vaccines and lockdowns come out and end, the economy recovers, they're going to say, look what good we did. But in reality, they probably stymied it more than they advanced it, and they put us in trillions in dollars of debt in the process.
Well, the other big lie that's being told by the Biden administration is that they will pay for this with tax dollars. So they say that they're going to propose this brand new tax package, which is going to dramatically increase the corporate tax rate, that they're going to somehow reshore all of the tax dollars that are being offshored right now, that companies for some reason will never flee. Yet similar at the same time, they have Janet Yellen out there trying to promote to other countries that they should also join us in raising taxes, which is a pretty good indicator that they understand that companies are just going to flee as soon as this thing happens. Beyond that, the tax bill that they're pushing forward, not only is that going to hamper economic growth, it also doesn't pay for what we're talking about right now. They say it'll raise $2.5 trillion over 15 years. So as you were talking about the time periods here, even if you use their fake 8-year period, we're going to spend $2.5 trillion in 8 years. We're supposed to pay for that with $2.5 trillion in tax increases over 15 years. Those time periods don't match up at all. That's basically just, we are going to eat a hamburger now and pay for it later.
Yeah, the math doesn't add up. So that means trillions more added to the debt. But even more importantly, Ben, I know you've talked about this. I remember being promised that nobody who made less than $400,000 would see a tax increase. But when you increase the corporate tax, I mean, American people are smart enough to know that just who's nominally assigned a tax is not the same thing as who actually bears the cost. All of the economics, the research, the literature, the studies show very clearly that corporations don't really pay taxes. It comes out of lower worker wages and higher consumer prices. So if Biden wants to slap through a corporate tax increase, that's actually going to mostly hit the American people. And it's going to, in effect, if not literally according to the letter of it, betray his promise that he's already betrayed, right? But the American people will feel this tax increase in their wallet when they're spending and in their paychecks for the millions of people that work for corporations and see lower wages as a result.
One of my favorite things about the Biden tax proposal, of course, is that he wants to increase the individual income tax, except that he also wants to get rid of the state and local tax on top. He wants to be able to have that deductible against the federal tax, which, of course, is basically just a reward to blue states with high tax rates, because what Trump's bill did, and I felt this when I was in California, is it removed that tax deduction. It used to be that you remove the taxes you pay to the state from your overall income, and then you pay tax to the federal government. Trump's bill said, no, we use the gross income for the calculation of both the state tax and the federal tax, which means you are paying more if you are at the top end of the economic spectrum and living in a blue state. Well, now what Biden wants to do is basically reward states for raising their own income taxes.
Yeah, I find it so hypocritical that supposedly progressive lawmakers are pushing all this on one hand, and then on the other hand, they're looking to restore their favorite tax subsidy for rich liberals in blue states. Right? The federal government is ostensibly, you and I don't think most of it actually does, but it's ostensibly spending money for the national benefit. So people should be ostensibly sharing the costs of that, not giving arbitrary subsidies to states that choose to have bigger government and more welfare that then get the benefits of that, but get to subsidize the costs to the federal taxpayer. So I'm totally against restoring that subsidy. And I think it's really a betrayal of the perhaps the only slight good part of the progressive values they're supposed to stand for is the part that they're actually selling out behind the scenes right now.
As Brad Polumbo, you can check out all of his work as opinion editor for FEE.org. He has a lot of great stuff over there. And also you can check out his work over at Young Voices on Washington Examiner. Check out his podcast, Breaking Boundaries with Brad Polumbo. Brad, appreciate the time and the insight.
Thanks so much.
All righty, we'll be back.